Well, good afternoon, everyone. And it is an afternoon. Normally, we would do these webinars on an evening, but this afternoon, we're preparing this webinar for streaming week commencing 30th of November. And there's a real reason behind that, because I've got six incredibly busy people. Six incredible busy people who've given up some time to talk about this quite critical issue, and that is deer vehicle collisions. We've got Stuart Lovatt from Highways England. We've got Korine Bishop from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary. We've got Jochen Langbein, who is one of the leading experts on this particular issue and other aspects of deer. We've got Jim Green from British Animal Rescue and Trauma Care Association, and we've also got Tony Lowry, who's known to many members in the society as well, for the UK DTR work that he does. So welcome, everyone. I said six people because behind the scenes we've got Laura, who makes everything work. So without further ado, we can start perhaps by asking Stuart, just set the context. What's the problem with deer at the moment? How much of a problem is it? And is it getting worse or is it getting better?
Okay, so I'm Stuart Lovatt. I'm the Strategic Road Safety Lead at Highways England. And I've been involved with the Deer Initiative, the Deer Society, for a number of years. And over that period, I think it would be fair to say that the situation is not getting any better. It's not easing at all. We are still seeing significant numbers of strikes every year. For example, if we take the last 13, 14 months, so even with the lockdown and the easing of traffic flows on the strategic road network, we still saw between June 19 and last week, November 2020, we had 2,247 incidents. We have certain hotspots, obviously, on our network. We also have, you could almost map the entire strategic road network basically by the numbers of incidents when you plot them. But say we do have hotspots. So in the Central Motorway Police Group around the Midlands, we've had 420. The Thames Valley area, 200 incidents. Greater Manchester, 140 incidents. Lancashire, particularly around the Loon Valley, around Lancaster, on the M6, we've had something like 130 incidents. And we can basically map that. So it's a significant issue for us. I'm pleased to be able to say that in that time, we've not had many casualty incidents to our customers, but we have had one or two serious incidents that have resulted in casualty incidents, but not necessarily as a direct result of the impact of the strike, the animal strike. But more about people getting out of the damaged vehicles to have a look and then being struck by passing traffic. So for us, there is a real issue about raising awareness, not just of the likelihood of coming across a deer or more, but also what to do if you're in that unfortunate situation of actually hitting a deer. So we're obviously, as always, pleased to be supporting this initiative and raising awareness to the travelling public, as well as to our own staff about the potential of coming across either a wounded or even a dead animal, and what to do in those circumstances.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Can I just ask a little question that's kind of spawned from some of the things you've said? It's pretty horrendous when you come across one of these accidents, tragic with deaths or injuries. I've operated on the area of the M6 that you alluded to there. And one of the things your guys talked to me is about the cost of a traffic event. Is there any work being done on the cost of a traffic event and the M6 being closed?
Yes, we have something called the Clear Initiative, which is obviously we're trying to ensure that we can reopen the network as quickly as possible. Obviously, that impact will depend on the severity of the incident, and in particular, if Korine and her colleagues are called, or the fire service, or even the paramedics. That will then obviously increase the closure of the network whilst the emergency services, or indeed our own colleagues, in trying to clear up that incident. Through the Clear initiative, we do actually cost out what the cost is of multiple lane closures of a full closure. I mean, for example, it can cost something like 2 million to close a road, a motorway, for a quarter of an hour, 30 minutes, depending on the capacity.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that, because there is a significant impact. It's also, I have to say, having observed it, both Korine's colleagues and your own and the AA and other emergency services, how quick they are moving and working. For a motorist who's wanting to get down the M6 or across the A30 or whatever it might be, the M62, it's an intolerable delay. But in actual fact, I've seen people who are breaking into sweat working so hard. And
Yes.
I don't think the general public see that.
No, I think the other thing is that people don't realise as well is that on a busy motorway, the traffic can build up roughly a mile a minute on a very busy motorway. So this is obviously we are a lot more skilled now in reopening the network. We work closely with our colleagues in the emergency services and the recovery industry, because it is a significant impact. When you're looking at a 15-minute incident to deal with something where there's not been a serious casualty, that can lead to significant delays running into miles. But more importantly, what can happen is that you then get secondary crashes as people maybe not paying attention, or on the other carriageway, who are what we call rubbernecking. They're watching the incidents as they drive past. And so an innocuous incident here, such as the deer strike, could then ultimately lead into much more serious and potentially fatal consequences as a result of just general road traffic incidents.
Okay, thanks very much, Stuart. That's a really comprehensive answer, and I probably put you a little bit on the spot there, but I think that was an important point to pick up there. I think that message ought to be going out on the BBC and ITV and on Sky News, because that's a real key message about the cost and the kind of issues that emerge. Jochen, Stuart started off by talking and saying that the problem is not getting any better. Is that borne out by the science and by the work that you've been doing, which I know has been comprehensive and quite longitudinal now?
Yes, it's very difficult to answer that question on whether it's actually getting worse or not, even though we've been collecting statistics now for close to 20 years, 17 years since we started a national project on deer vehicle collisions, and supported by Highways England, who, of course, overall, should say, are mainly, concerned with the highways network of motorways and major A-class trunk roads. And of course, just in England, in addition, we've been doing a study in Scotland for Scottish Natural Heritage and with Transport Scotland, because of the UK-wide problem. But of course, the trunk roads only make up about 10% of all roads, but about 30% of all traffic. And of course, overall, the majority of deer collisions are trunk roads, which, even though our main funding has been from Highways England and Transport Scotland, overall that problem is obviously nationwide. But one thing we have found is during the last few years, and we'll perhaps have a look at some slides in a moment, but is that overall numbers seem to increase very drastically until about 2007. But then actually started to level off. And that's mainly because for the first time at that stage, traffic volumes nationwide actually started to level off, especially after 2007 economic sort of downturn. And of course, fewer cars on the road means fewer deer collisions overall. So it's only since 2012-13 we've seen a sort of increase again, clearly. But these are just an overview of all the records that we've collected through various organizations since 2003, when these national projects started. And you can see in the first 10 years between 2000 and 2009, we actually started in 2003, but collected retrospective data as well from RSPCA and SSPCA. In those first 10 years, we collected about 48,000 incidents, and these are all either dead deer casualties or actual accidents with deer. And in the next 10 years, we collected about a similar number, again, about 50,000 in all, about 40,000 of them in England. But after 2007, we actually restricted the number of categories of sources that we used, because there was some overlap with them, but most of all, not a very good national picture from some of the sources. Like we got records from some sources, like local authorities could give us good information in some counties, but not in others. So it wouldn't really give a fair national picture. So we've concentrated mainly on the animal welfare records from RSPCA predominantly and SSPCA in Scotland, and the trunk road dead deer uplifts, the deer managers and experts like deer stalkers or forestry commission rangers and so on, who can provide very good detailed information, and also the road safety teams who could in the initial years give us damage only accidents as well as human injury accidents. Damage only accidents don't tend to be recorded statistics now in the ST19, so that sort of declined later on. Could perhaps have a look at the first map. And that just shows that overall in those last 10 years, these are all records from the last 10 years mapped nationwide, and you can see that's basically, it is an issue in every part of the country. Slightly lower in Wales than in the other parts of the country. I mean, Wales deer aren't as widely distributed as everywhere else. But other than that, you know, there are very few roads nationwide where we haven't got any collisions. But, you know, that map is 10 years worth of records, but it's worth bearing in mind that we've only collected about 10% of all deer collisions that are recorded, that occur. But, you know, not most, the vast majority are not reported. So really that gives probably a single year's, you know, it's probably approximates to what actually occurs every single year. And you can see on that map the trunk roads highlighted. Simply, these are all records, individual locations of deer accidents. But of course, it also highlights that there are far more overall off the trunk road network than on those trunk roads, which are overall generally safer roads than the minor rural roads. The most dangerous roads for deer collisions tend to be fast non-trunk A roads, which are sort of single lane in each direction. The next map, that's less baffling. That just shows you in southern England, and this just reduces all that baffling detail and just shows the relative numbers of deer that we've recorded in amongst, again, all from these 10 years, and shows some of the hot spots where we've actually got. These are all just 3-mile squares, or 5-kilometer squares. And those hotspots, you know, show where we've actually got about 50 or so, 50 to, well, in some cases, 700 even within a 5-kilometer square recorded over those 10 years. And that's, for example, around East Sussex, Ashdown Forest, you can spot that, and you can spot other ones like at Cannock Chase in the Midlands, and the Forest of Dean, but also down in the southwest, we've got various locations highlighted. But I really just wanted to show those to show what information we already have and what sort of can be built on in future. Although these projects, at least in England, is now completed. You know, it finished at the end of 2019. And you know, this just shows you the picture around London, and you have to think every coloured dot is a location of a deer collision, and of course many more than one in each of those locations. So you can see all the main arteries of the trunk roads leading into, but also you've got a very heavy pattern of collisions there. And this one here, a close-up view of Hampshire, where you know many of us are based, or at least I used to be based in Hampshire, and of course British Deer Society in Hampshire. And Hampshire just happened to be the county where we record most deer collisions nationwide. So in Hampshire alone, we've got over 3,500 collisions recorded in the last 10 years. And I would actually estimate that every single year we have over 2,000 deer collisions in Hampshire. Now, you may think that sounds excessive and over-extrapolated, but it is not. Because as you can see, all the red triangles on that map are all human injury collisions. So these are all official statistics from Hampshire County Council in their ST19 police official records of police-attended human injury accidents, and they range from slight injuries to the people to serious, as well as some fatal injuries. I mean, in Hampshire, I think we've had about 4 fatal injuries since the project started in 2003. But overall, on Hampshire, there are in the region of 15 to 20 every single year. So it just shows you some of the reality of it. But also Tony, who will be speaking later about the animal dispatch, will already probably notice that there are very few on some of the roads that he attends to, because these are mostly RSPCA statistics, trunk road statistics, and those from the human injury accidents. But most of the accidents, or many of the accidents, are dealt with by private stalkers who we have not been having the records from until recently from Tony. But you know, the majority of the people who actually deal with them aside from RSPCA, we don't get the records from. So there are many, many more, but it's something at least to build on.
Okay, thanks, Jochen. I think in many ways, with Highways England here, it's speaking volumes that it follows a distinct pattern there. What can members of the BDS and other organisations do to help with science research? Or is this going to be shelved now? Is there an area where we can put this data in? And I'm sure Tony's going to suggest some other ways in which we could be ensuring data is getting good use made of it.
Yeah, well, again, what happens in future, I'm not sure yet. In Scotland, Scottish Natural Heritage are continuing with similar data collection going on. I'm standing back from that now. In England, I don't know, because the Deer Initiative had hosted this project, and of course the Deer Initiative folded in April. Quite how it's going to go forward, I don't know. But also, I think you make the point is that we have got a lot of data to draw on. We know where the hotspots are. Really, what's probably most important now is to decide how we use this data in actually trying to do more to tackle those hotspots. Those hotspots won't stay the same all the time, but at least they give us an idea where the worst area, the indications are, and where we can perhaps then supplement it with local information going forward, such as where, for example, Tony will speak later about the A343, where there are many more incidents than we've even recorded. But at least we can start to target some of this and see what can be done, because really my main disappointment with the whole project is how little we've actually managed to get off the ground in practice in doing mitigation.
Okay, thanks, Jochen. I'm conscious that Tony wants to engage there, but if I just keep you hanging on there a bit, Tony. So I'm just going to let everyone introduce their own area. You'll be coming after Korine. It's interesting because each of the webinars so far has had some implications or some output for the BDS, perhaps to pick up policy-wise or perhaps to pick up training-wise. And I think there's some strong messages from already what Stuart has said and already what Jochen has said. So, Korine, you're at the first sharp pointy end, because you're going to get the phone call and your guys are going to have to manage it. How do you manage the DVCs in your area, the deer vehicle collisions? And without buttering you up, how do you manage them so effectively? Because when people talk about areas that have effective management, yours is one of the areas that is talked about.
Okay, Morris, well, I'll give you a bit of a history. So we've got a system in place in Hampshire called the Humane Animal Dispatch Scheme. It wasn't set up by myself. It was set up by my predecessor, Louise Hubbell, in conjunction with the British Deer Society and the Deer Initiative. And it's sort of Hampshire Constabulary identifying that we've got responsibility and obligations under the Animal Welfare Act, Protection of Animals Act and the Deer Act. We actually need to do something positive. So the scheme was set up. The idea is that you use volunteers. We have numerous people that have firearms licenses, shotgun holders, and people with those firearms that also have a humane animal dispatch qualification attached to their firearms. So why we're not using these volunteers to support us? So previously, if a deer or an animal has been injured in a road traffic collision, if you look at a number of other forces, it's probably your armed response vehicles that are attending those incidents. Whilst they're attending that, they're not able to attend to other incidents. So within Hampshire, we've got 38 volunteers. they, and I'm sure Tony will be able to tell you a bit more about the course because I know that he attended it. So they were given a training which was from the Deer Initiative and the British Deer Society alongside us, looking at dynamic risk assessment at the scene, how we deal with that and how that actually then works going forward. A call would come in from a member of the public, it would go through to our control room, and they would then look who would be the most appropriate person to deploy to that incident. So all of our human animal dispatchers, as I said, are volunteers. We can contact them 24/7. So the control would look at the area where the accident occurred or where the deer or the animal was, and then would look at the most appropriate person to send. What we try and do is each volunteer works within a sort of a 7-8 mile radius of where they live. Although I know a number of them would be a lot more willing to travel if they need to, because at the end of the day, this is around, looking after the animals and making sure that they're not suffering. Police officer would also be deployed. Again, that can be to protect the dispatcher, to make sure, we're talking about fast roads here. We don't want to be sending someone who hasn't got the right training, the right equipment to be out in the road with a gun when you've got cars racing past them. So the police officer would attend in the first instance, make the area safe. Then the dispatcher would attend and then deal and dispatch humanely with the animal or the deer. There are some cases where the dispatcher will arrive before the police. They've had enough training that they can risk assess that actually, yes, this is on the side of the road, there isn't much traffic, I'm quite happy, and I'm sure Tony will be able to give some examples of this. If I wait for a police officer to turn up, the deer is suffering. We need to put the deer out of its misery and dispatch it effectively. Each time they are dispatched, they then send me an email to say that this is what's happened, this was the incident, this was the area, and then I feed that back into Dorothy, actually, who's collating some of the numbers for us. So that's how we work. There's a lot of things that I think we can improve on, and I'm meeting with Jim tomorrow to look at how we can not only improve this for Hampshire, but also trying to get this working nationally as well.
Okay, that's really reassuring, because when I was first talking to Jim, I was thinking, gosh, there's massive opportunities here for joint learning, and I think that's one of the benefits of the webinar. I know that there have been questions coming in, and of course the police are always on the point and they're always going to be criticised, but I believe that your guys, when they're out on a shout, have had some training, haven't they?
Yes, so all of our officers are aware that we have the Humane Animal Dispatch Scheme, so if they do turn up, that is the first thing that they're going to be requesting. Unfortunately, there are occasions when we maybe can't get hold of one, and in those instances we would still deploy an armed response vehicle, but our first port of call is the Humane Animal Dispatchers. They're dealing with this day in, day out, and for me they are our experts.
Yep, thank you. Now, it connects with something that Jim and Tony have already raised, but also Stuart alluded to earlier. When there is a deer vehicle collision, we tend not to be dealing just with an animal that's in severe distress. We quite often are dealing with the public who are quite distressed. Sometimes they can be quite angry, very frustrated, and how do you train your guys on that? Because that's a real spot skill, or is that just part of what they're good at anyway?
I wouldn't say we specifically train. I think there is some common sense attached to that. And any instant that you turn up to where there is some kind of trauma, whether that's with a person or an animal, you sort of you kick into it. So for me, and I can probably give some examples where the police officer turned up and you have someone hysterical because the animal's been injured, and they want to try and save the animal. So then when a dispatcher turns up and dispatches the deer, that can cause some upset. And also then it's managing the members of the public of the reasons why we're doing that, and also then looking after them after the event as well.
Okay, it's interesting, as you're a statutory body, as the police service, I was looking at the highway code, and there's nothing in the highway code about what to do if you hit an animal. And perhaps one of the things we need to do is get some information out there as what do you do when you hit an animal. I mean, I know it's what do you do when you have an accident and you've got to report it, but there is something. What do you do when you hit an animal? And I know from Stuart's point of view is if you're on the hard shoulder of a motorway, stay in your car or get up away from the hard shoulder and go up the bank so that you are safe. But many people, when they're traumatized, it doesn't work like that. You can get them getting out of the car and wandering all over the place. And in actual fact, they get in the way of managing the deer or the animal effectively. Any comments on that? Is there perhaps a little credit card with what to do that we can put in motorway service stations?
That's a very good idea. I mean, education is definitely the key here. And you say what to do, there's also what not to do. So we've had instances where people hit a deer and then they put it in the back of their vehicle thinking I can take it to a vet who would then be able to hopefully save the animal. Unfortunately, this then causes even more distress to the animal. Deers are wild creatures. And if you try and put one in the back of your car, not only are they going to injure the deer then, they're powerful creatures, could end up injuring the person in the vehicle as well. In relation to getting out their vehicles, on the hard shoulder, I mean, the advice is that you would get behind a hard barrier if you broke down or had any accident on the motorway or fast roads. That is the safest place for you to be. Call it in straight away. And one really good thing, and I know this app is growing rapidly, is the What 3 Words app, because you can give an absolute specific location right now, and that really does help when you're out in those rural areas where you're asked by the police control room, where are you? And it's like, I'm on a long road between two big trees. Whereas the What 3 Words this is exactly where I am. So for me, advice is that people need to think about the hazards. They're a hazard themselves. The accident is a hazard. So for me, yes, so it's location, where are you? Also what hazards there are as well. So you need to be communicating that to the control room, because then that would also depend on who we send. So if there's a high risk of hazard, so if it is on a motorway that we, I was listening to Stuart talking about having to shut the whole motorway and the cost that involves. But if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. And if you're going to shut a whole motorway, you need more than one humane animal dispatcher and your local response officer to attend that incident. So it's that information as to what's happening.
Okay, that's brilliant. We've been leading into the actual incidents, and I think we're beginning to develop some guidance, some information that would probably do well in the Deer Journal, I think, and perhaps some wider publicity. Tony, you're one of the leading people with Humane Animal Dispatch with UKDTR. What's the picture on the ground like now? And just before we get into you describing what the picture is on the ground now, how has lockdown impacted upon deer vehicle collisions in the area that you're covering?
Hi, good afternoon all. Well, certainly during the early part of lockdown, when there literally was no cars on the road or very few, I found that the deer vehicle collisions actually went up. I suppose because the roads are quieter, deer roads, and people travelling faster because there weren't so many vehicles. We're coming into a period now where it's darker nights, longer nights. So I attended I've done 3 this week already, as Korine will tell you. And I'll just backtrack a little bit on the reporting point of view. I think the BDS certainly, and maybe Highways England, can get across some message of how to report these incidents. The one I did last night or night before was the lady didn't know who to phone. The police are the best people to phone, regardless of where you are in the country. They'll deal with it however that constabulary happens to deal with RTAs. From a reporting point of view, I think that the BDS's new app on reporting deer vehicle collisions or deer sightings is fantastic, because you can do it on your phone when you stop, so it's much easier rather than got to do it when you get home and get onto the computer to do it. So from a reporting point of view, I think the app is a fantastic way of doing it. Training, I wrote a few things down while you guys were talking. From a training point of view, there's some fantastic training out there. I found the training I had with the BDS and the police and the Deer Initiative invaluable, and it's a pity it's not rolled out to more counties. I know Thames Valley have got the same training, but their scheme's not up and running yet. So from a training point of view, that was very good. When you get to some of these scenes, the police, for lots of different reasons, this week, the police are busy. I couldn't even get through on our hotline numbers, the control room, because the police are busy and they have to prioritise, obviously. So I understand that. What free word is fantastic, as Korine said, getting a location from the control room to get into where the deer is. You can go straight there. So I suppose to spend half an hour trying to find it.
Okay, that's really helpful, because already we're beginning to flow into the use of technology, and quite simple technology.
Yeah.
What 3 words and the BDS app, which would really help. So, I mean, I work in the Yorkshire area. We have very good links with UK DTR.
Yeah.
And we respect those links, and the quality of the training we're always impressed with when we're working with them, particularly with the tracking. What challenges do you have at the moment? You know, can you get enough volunteers? Can you train enough people?
From UK DTR point of view, it's very difficult to get new members, because they've got not only got to be dog people, they have to be experienced stalkers. As tracking from the roadside can only be done, certainly in England, when I know who the landowner is, and locally I do know a lot of people, so I do some from locally. But yeah, we certainly need more members, and as I say, it's quite difficult filling those positions, because they need to be experienced in both. You have to be experienced deer people and experienced dog people.
Now, Jim, we kind of broaden things with yourself because you are the British Animal Rescue and Trauma Care Association. You're not just dealing with deer. I have to say that I have part of my finger missing and part of my calf missing from when I've been dealing with badgers by the roadside in a long time ago. So I've forgiven the badgers there. But you're involved in training and intervention and education. What are your priorities, and what's your immediate response to some of the talk that we've had this afternoon?
Thanks, Maurice, and it's a real pleasure to join this conversation, because everything that's been talked about so far really resonates with what we're trying to achieve in Barter. I wear 2 hats. I'm the director of the British Animal Rescue and Trauma Care Association, but that's been born out of the work that I started within the Fire and Rescue Service, and I am also an animal specialist, or an animal rescue specialist, within Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service, and as such, part of my role leads me to deal with all incidents involving animals. And you know, I was really shocked with the statistics for Hampshire. 2,000 deer vehicle collisions every year. That's a lot, and I've dealt personally with the aftermath of human fatalities, where deer have been hit in the New Forest, and I've seen and felt the kind of emotional aspects of that. And really this boils down to a combination of things, really, where we have emergency responders who understand instinctively about management of incidents and scenes, but who might not understand the instinctive needs of an animal in distress. And then we've got perhaps specialists that we need to call on to support us at an incident, who might not be accustomed to working in that kind of dynamic multi-agency environment. So I think there's a difference between many of the kind of what I would look at as a low-key deer collision, where it may involve only 1 or 2 agencies, and then we've got the kind of wider incidents where we've got human issues where the intervention is greater. And I think it's really important for emergency responders to have a great deal of situational awareness, so that they understand the needs of the incident, they can summon the right resources, gain the right specialist advice, and bring that situation to a conclusion as efficiently as possible. So Barter's role really is to be the catalyst for supporting emergency responders and also perhaps those others who may get involved with emergency situations involving animals. And at the moment we're working on a package for the National Fire Service, where we can understand the needs of any incident where animals are involved, and those animals may be a risk to our firefighters or other emergency responders. They may hinder our operations, because of their presence, or the situation may require us to have a knowledge of how to resolve that actual animal issue. That's the reason that we're going. So wide implications, multiple species we deal with, variety of different environmental risks, and that of course leads us to require different responder groups to intervene because it may be their jurisdiction. So just for instance, with Stuart's team in Highways England, back in 2016-17, we worked with their learning and development team. They deal with about 4,000 animal incidents on the network every year, and that's multiple species, and each species has different needs. So it was important to recognise the needs of them and the skills that those responders needed to understand what they could do within their capabilities and where they needed to call on more specialist resources to help them. So the big project that we're starting for the coming year is one of the reasons why I'm working with Korine tomorrow. Actually, we would like to create a usable guide for emergency responders, particularly fire and rescue, to look at the type of animal that's involved and to work out what kind of response is required to deal effectively with that animal. Now, that may be a veterinary intervention, but more often than not with these situations, it's someone that can provide euthanasia. And we need to ensure that we've got the right credentialed person to deal with the animal that we're faced with. And so we're really pleased that in Hampshire, deer vehicle collisions are very simple for us because we have that route where we can call on the police, they can send a humane animal dispatcher, but there are other situations that fall out of that scope, which may involve deer, where it's not quite so clear cut. And so we want to ensure that emergency responders know who to call when they have a situation to deal with, and what that euthanasia is likely to look like, because it's really important that they're able to communicate that within the incident scene, and they can prepare people for what it looks like. And there are a lot of emergency responders who wouldn't be necessarily prepared for euthanasia actions, and there needs to be some very pragmatic decisions made at the scene, and what we would do is try and limit the impact that will have on the humans that are at the incident, and of course limit the stress and anxiety on the animals that may be at the scene. So there's a lot of work that we're engaged with at the moment, and we would be very grateful for the British Deer Society to support us with that project, to provide that guidance for our emergency responders that can go out nationally. And Korine and I are looking at whether the package that we put together would be of benefit through the College of Policing or the National Police Chiefs Council. So yeah, quite a broad remit that we're involved with as barter, but in this specific area, there are some needs that are immediate, and we believe the BDS can help us to resolve.
I'm sure the BDS would be more than happy to facilitate help and support, because this is a key issue, and it's a fundamental for the British Deer Society, which is a concern about the welfare of the animals. Jochen, all that research that you've got, I know that you've been experimenting with ways to try and prevent deer vehicle and animal collisions. How are you getting on with that research, and how effective is it being?
Well, we have been trying all sorts of roadside deterrents. So, there are numerous ways of tackling deer accidents. I think the first thing to say about mitigation on deer is that generally you can't rely on a single method. So it has to be a combination of methods, and we'll get back to some of those other things like signage, cutting verges back, and so forth later on. The things you're probably asking about most are roadside deterrents, like we've had roadside deer warning reflectors and wolves' eyes in the country for 50+ years, and really any sort of light reflecting devices. There's almost no, there are probably 90+ scientific papers that show that they basically do not work. So light reflecting devices that simply use the headlights, reflect them into the verge, and try to prevent deer from crossing. Generally, there's no scientific evidence that they really do work. So what we have been trying more so in recent years, especially at Cannock Chase, are using acoustic and active signage that actually emit their own sound signals as well as own strobe light signals, which has been shown to be much more promising, at least on the continent, but mainly with roe deer rather than fallow deer and herding species. And for them, they haven't really been proven so well. There is actually a scientific paper now that, for these deer deter devices, as they're called, that is a peer-reviewed paper from Australia that they work against for a great number of different range of animals. But in this country so far, at Cannock, for the first year and the sort of 2-mile stretch where we tested these, they've been fairly successful. I mean, the rangers have kept a very close eye on them. In the first year, we had a very good reduction, but after about 6 months and certainly into the second year, we had various issues, but most of all, the problem tends to be that with fallow deer, which are herding species, that once the first one goes across, there's nothing going to stop the others rushing across if they're trying to keep up with the herd. And I think for those animals, it's very difficult to use any form of deterrence, and we've just still haven't really got, I've actually supported the company who were trying to distribute them in this country, and but I cannot put my hand on my heart and say we're really getting somewhere with them in terms of the herding species. I think they're very well pursuing for areas with roe deer and muntjac, but for fallow deer, we still haven't got the proof that we could really have a significant effect in reducing the numbers of deer crossing and in front of traffic.
Okay, thanks. That's a really important point to make, and I suppose, and I hope it might link in what Korine might want to contribute, because we've got animals that aren't going to change their behaviour very well, but we've also got a human who can change their behaviour. And certainly when you see one deer, you can expect to see some more coming across. I just wondered, because I think both you and Korine and perhaps Tony have been involved in the movable road signs, which is about changing and adapting human behaviour. Whereby if you have the sign that is static for a long period of time, people tend to just see it merging into part of the background. Whereas if you have the moving signs or a flashing sign, it tends to work. I wonder if perhaps, Korine, I'll come to you first, and then Jochen, and then Tony.
I was just going to pick up on what Jochen just said in relation to with herds and educating the public. So my office is based in the New Forest at Lyndhurst, and the same place every day when I drive home, you'll see deer in the same place, and you'll see one, you slow down, I know that there's going to be at least 4 or 5 others following along. So again, I think for that message for members of the public, especially if you're looking at getting some cards out, or if we're putting anything out on social media or any leaflets that we do, is to reiterate that point that you're probably not just going to be one scene running, there's going to be a number of them, and that's where we can change our behaviour to make sure that we slow down, wait, and not try and just get through as quick as possible. I'd probably pass on to Tony in relation to the signage. He's probably got a bit more information than I have.
Yeah, I've seen the signage both with Dorothy on her patch and also with Ian Skelton in work with Jochen up on Cannock Chase. How effective have the movable signs been, Tony?
I think they are. We had one on that particular stretch that Jochen was talking about near me on the A343 at the 10-mile stretch. We had it for a short period of time. I don't think it was there long enough. This February, we had 6 brand new deer aware signs put up on that 10-mile stretch between those 2 towns. And talking to people on social media and text, etc., they said, what signs? So people, as you say, don't see those signs. I think you need, and there's a couple of hot spots in particular. I think Laura will bear me out that we've had over 46 or 49 now, because I had 3 this week, on that particular stretch that I have dealt with and seen. That's just the ones I've been on the 10-mile stretch of one bit of road. Now it needs decent warning signs, bigger signs, flashing signs on those hot spots. One hot spot in particular where you just know, and people, for lots of different reasons, we know preach to the converted, stalkers and hunters and country people know the dangers. It's the people in the towns that are using these roads to get from one town to another where we need to get the message across to them. They think it's never, they're in their tin box and they think it's never going to happen to them. Well, it's happening more and more regularly now.
Perhaps one of the routes that we could use or endeavour to use might be perhaps through some schoolwork, because if kids take the message home and they admonish their parents when they're driving too fast, or they're not aware, it might be one conduit for doing some developmental work there. What about on the major roads, Stuart? Do you have signs that can come up to warn people of animals? I mean, normally the signs you see is reduced speed, or ice on the road, or fog ahead, or obstruction ahead. Are there any signs that come up on the electronic boards that inform motorists that there might be an animal hazard on the road?
We do. We have the variable message signs, the matrix signs,
Yep.
which are above, but of course that's predominantly only on the motorway network. We don't really have them on local rural roads that we manage, because the motorway network is roughly 50% of our network. So we have the big gantry signs, and we can put animal in the road, but we're maybe somebody's reported that into our control rooms, and so we can put them up. And of course, we're known animal crossing points or incursions, we can put up the traditional signs, the triangular signs, the warning signs. But of course, as everybody's talked about here on this call, the issue is, and it's well documented and researched, is sign blindness. And so you're seeing the same sign, and if it's there all year round, and so you see that sign which is saying deer for the next 10 miles, and you travel that route every day to work and home from work, then you will become blind to that sign. And again, there's some good research which suggests that in order to get some information over to a motorist, you need 3 signs. So you need to see repeating signs. And certainly something that worked with did previously was the deer aware signs. Now, the thing is, it's heavily regulated by something called the Traffic Signs and Regulation General Directive, of what kind of signs you can put up and where, and then these become, regulatory signs. But we've done some work around this, and you can put up temporary signs, and you can class them as an advertisement. And so, particularly using temporary signs or advertising signs, so therefore they're not bound by the heavy regulation and usage of specific road signs. You can put them there, say, during the season, when the propensity to see more deer movements is better, and that's something that we've talked about, and that can then be very much a local initiative, whether that be the local authority or local clubs, can then put these temporary signs up. And if you're, as I say, you're commuting to work and to and from, and you're dawn to dusk driving, suddenly seeing a different sign, and obviously the more complex that sign is, the more expensive it will be. But just putting a yellow-backed board up with a deer aware sign, as we've developed previously, they're quite easy for local clubs and things with agreement with the road authority to put these up. And obviously, then gets into the whole issue about making sure that the people who are putting the signs up aren't also then at risk. But a temporary sign, particularly at periods of greater use, in my view, is far more effective than on a sign up all year round saying, expect to see deer any time of the year for the next 10 miles. It's pointless.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Jochen, you were wanting to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit more about the virtual message signs, like the digital signage. Like in, Stuart's counterparts in Transport Scotland actually do use the virtual message signs on the big gantries on the motorways in Scotland every spring in May and every October, November for their main deer aware campaign. So for 6 weeks, they tend to have this high risk of deer on road signs, throughout Scotland in the spring, and then mainly in the Highlands for the red deer peak in the autumn as well. But in addition, also in Scotland, what we have tried on 4 different major roads in the Highlands are some solar powered speed-activated deer signage, which are basically like the normal highway code sort of wild animal warning triangle, but it's lit up with a digital warning sign as soon as people exceed the speed limit in that area. But it actually shows the deer sign coming up there. And they do seem to have been quite successful. They've only been running for 2 years and they need to be renewed. But I think those solar-powered signs at hotspots with stretches that actually just light up as you enter that stretch of 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer or so are probably much more effective than the standard warning sign that people just ignore. But I just want to say that quite a lot of these are being used in Scotland, and that's probably a way forward in a lot of areas.
Okay, so learning from the science there and learning from the practice that's developing across the areas, and I think that's perhaps something BDS and other organisations can do to help facilitate that. I wonder, Korine, over the period of the lockdown, as a service, have you noticed a change in people's driving habits?
Well, we went through a long period of time, didn't we, where a lot of people didn't go out, and the roads, especially for me around the New Forest, were lovely. They didn't seem anybody, and that was in the first lockdown. Second lockdown doesn't feel like that at all. Lots of cars on the road. I couldn't comment on if that's changed because of lockdown or how people driving has changed. It's not sort of I'm not an expert in that field to be able to comment on that one.
Okay, perhaps very wise to do that. It's just interesting because I'm on a major Pennine route, and the vehicles are travelling significantly faster through my village. They are really clipping along, and fortunately it's not so many deer, although we've had 6 in the last 7 weeks, which is pushing it a little bit. But they tend to hit dry stone walls because they lose control of the cars because they're travelling so fast. In fact, we've got an Audi still embedded in a wall just up the road from us. So it's just looking at whether or not there's a change in drivers' behaviour, because as I think we begin to draw to a close on this session, there is a concern that we can perhaps address, but we'll come to that in just a moment. Stuart, you were wanting to come in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Korine was just on that point to support Korine's. We know from monitoring our network, the strategic road network in England is actually roughly 3% of the roads in England, 4 million customers a day. During the first lockdown in particular, and it doesn't seem to be quite the same reaction from the public in the second lockdown, I agree with Korine, but in the first lockdown, we saw traffic volumes down by 80%. We saw particularly an increase in speeds, not that significant, but perhaps 7 miles an hour on average, which on a 60, 70 mile an hour road can be considerable. And I think that's the kind of messages that we need to be getting at, is whether you're on a rural road or you're on a strategic road, a higher speed road, is that just because the road seems quieter, you should not therefore feel as if become more confident and increase your speeds. You should still travel to those conditions. So if that's at dawn and might be a bit misty or it's raining or whatever, one of the things that we always try to advise the people is you do not know when something is going to happen. You have to prepare, and to be able to react, you have to give yourself time. So whether that is somebody braking in front of you, or whether that's a dog on a local road, or a deer as we're talking about today, is just because the road appears to be quieter, that doesn't mean to say that the risk has gone. And as we come out of lockdown, and particularly the longer first lockdown, we had people who hadn't driven for many, many months in some cases, certainly not longer distances. And so therefore people just need to think and to consider the potential risks that they can face, and particularly in areas where we are identifying the risk of an animal strike is even greater, and be prepared to react. And so I think it's about raising that awareness, but then, as I say, explaining to people what to do then if the unfortunate does occur.
I'll come to Korine first, but I'll come to Tony because I've got an additional question for Tony. So Korine first.
It was just on the back of what Stuart said. There's a saying, I'm sure you've all heard of it, that the speed limit is that it's a limit, it's not a target, and then making sure that people are driving for the conditions of the road. So if you look at some of the rural roads, especially up sort of like Andover, you've got 60-mile-an-hour limits. If you go 60 miles an hour around that bend, you'll probably end up in a tree. So it's just, again, that education, and it's a limit, not a target.
Excellent point. Thank you very much. I think that's one of the little catchphrases that we should be putting out. Tony.
Yeah, one point I'd like to bring up from a dispatch point of view is I've noticed certainly an increase in urban dispatches in and around towns. Obviously, my town is Andover, particularly with Muntjac. I've had them on the railways, had to dispatch them on the railways, but certainly in town, and that brings a whole load of other problems. And certainly wearing good high visibility clothing turns you from a hunter into somebody who's come to deal with a deer. You have to, if you perceive it from how the public see you, sometimes you get to an instant, there might be 20 people. And if the police aren't there yet, then you have to have the right approach. And it's not always about dispatching the deer. It's sometimes dealing with public and traffic first of all. But yeah, it's certainly a tricky one. And more urban deer now are coming into play.
I think that's absolutely correct. The interface between humans and deer is increasing. And people, as a consequence, are wanting to know more about them, which gives us that opportunity for educational routes. It's come into my question line, Tony, that we got cracking with this talk quite quickly. And for many people, they might not know who UKDTR are. I wonder if you'd just like to tell us what UKDTR are and what you do.
Basically, it stands for UK Deer Track and Recovery. It came about from me meeting a Danish chap about 12 years ago, and they have specialist dogs which are used for tracking deer, not only from wounded animals, but deer from the roadside. So if you hit an animal in Denmark, you have to report it to the police, and then the police call out a team, part of the team, which go and can track from the roadside. So that was conceived from me meeting him. We've got a very small team now. There's about 26 of us that cover the whole UK, which is nowhere near enough. And we're called out to actually track animals, sometimes from the roadside if we can gain permission in England. Scotland's slightly different, but that's where it's conceived from, me meeting that gentleman 12 years ago. And we're voluntary, we're a voluntary organisation.
But you would be involved in deer vehicle collisions, you'd be involved in animals that are injured, animals that are distressed, animals that are unwell, animals that have been injured as a consequence of culling or deer management activities?
Yes, certainly. That's where the majority of our work from the tracking dogs come from, is from, misplaced bullets, etc. As I say, we can track from the roadside if we can gain permission from the landowner. It's a bit of a tricky one. It needs legislation changing, and that's not going to happen in my lifetime.
Or it might be legislation that might crack the problem eventually, but it might be education in the short to medium term, whereby people are more aware. I think anyone who has ever seen an animal that is distressed is quite traumatized by it, and they would want it to be managed in the most effective and efficient way that's possible. And part of the education, it would have been nice had we been able to get a vet on today, but certainly vets would be able to advise that we can't rehabilitate some of these animals. It would have been nice to have someone from a rehabilitation centre. We look to that towards the future, but again, rehabilitation in many cases is just simply not an option. Tony?
I'd just like to say I do work quite closely with Wiltshire Wildlife, but they know when animals, sometimes mainly deer in my case, can't be mended and need dispatching, and they phone me, then I have to phone it into Hampshire Constabulary and go and do the job. So I do work closely with a couple of wildlife organisations, and they know that deer, unfortunately, when they're that bad, normally if deer are on the roadside and still alive, they normally need dispatching. If they're walking wounded from the road, then they get away from the road to the fields and woods and die there, or so they become a problem out there and not a problem for highways or the roads. Okay,
we're coming up to the hour, slightly over the hour of talking about this issue, and therefore we're just beginning to end. We've been told, in spite of everything that people might have been led to believe, that Christmas this year is not going to be cancelled. And there is likely to be a migration commencing on the 23rd, which is likely to be bigger than some of the reindeer migrations that we see up in the northern latitudes. Are there any messages that you would like to get out about how people drive over this Christmas period?
I think there's some very simple messages from Highways England as we come up to the seasonal travel times. Is first of all, prepare your journey. Think about when you're travelling. Less people will be travelling by train today, and as we come out of the lockdown and we come into Christmas because of the restrictions on the train. So therefore, you can expect to see the network being busier. So therefore, you need to think about the time that you're travelling. If everybody sets off and travels at the traditional commuting times, then expect the network to be exceptionally busy. And so therefore, I think people should try and stagger the journeys and think about and prepare for what they do. Obviously, as we come into winter, the travelling conditions could be worse. And then particularly what we need to be thinking about here is, as we've talked about today, things may happen on that journey. So it's important that you check your vehicle. So check things like your tyres and your brakes, and do your usual checks to make sure that your lights are working and windscreen wipers, you've got the water in there to clear, particularly as we grit the roads more as the weather deteriorates. So there are things that you can do to reduce the risk to yourself, but also there are things you can do. So it's not about exceeding the speed limit. So this is not all about speed, of course, but it's about travelling to the conditions. So if the weather deteriorates, if it's raining, then slow down, take extra care, because obviously that affects the visibility as well as the stopping distances of your vehicle. So if something does come out into the road and you've got defective tyres and the road's wet, then it's going to take you longer to stop. So it's about travelling to the conditions. It's about preparing your journey. It's about preparing yourself. Make sure that you're not too tired because of the time of year or the season or what have you. So unexpected things do happen. There are things that we can do, and this is more around trying to prevent the incident so that we don't have to then deal with some of the horrible things that do happen. And just respect the people who are out there through the holiday period who are trying to keep everybody safe and keep the network running.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps a local message from you, Korine?
It's hard to follow Stuart there. I think Stuart probably covered most of the things, but it is definitely about driving to the conditions. I was going to say about making sure that you're not tired when you drive. And of course, if you've had a drink, definitely don't drive. If you've had a drink the night before, again, still also remember that you could still be over the limit in the morning. All these things impair your driving and can impair your reflexes. So again, I can't really follow, I don't want to repeat what Stuart said, but it's about just being safe and driving to your own conditions.
Okay, thank you. And picking up Tony references and some of the information that we've had from Jochen, you can actually have some free Christmas presents, because what 3 words is free? And if you're wanting to notify where the deer are or where the incident is, you've got a free Deer App, which will help you with that. Jochen, can I just check with yourself that those slides that you put up, which I think people will want to scrutinise, are they going to be available on the BDS website?
I think they, as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy that they can be, because they're, a lot of the slides we've put out in the past have been from the separate projects for England and a separate one in Scotland. So I've just combined some of these data. I'm still, going to send far more information to Highways England shortly in the next week or two. But I would have thought, as long as Stuart is happy for those maps to go as they are, I'm sure there shouldn't be any issues with that.
Okay, I'm sure that colleagues in the British Deer Society and in the branches would be all over those maps, looking at hotspots and sort of gaining some different perspectives. I really do appreciate the time that you have given up this afternoon. What I can assure you is that the pattern of the webinars are that they don't stop once we stop filming, because your talks, your comments will stimulate comments, questions and queries, which we continue to answer long after the webinar is completed. You may get some referrals to you, and it also gives us some opportunities. Some things that have popped up this afternoon will influence perhaps some of the discussions BDS may be having, or other organisations might pick up from this. So it's quite an amazing thing. We have a webinar for about an hour, and it spawns a huge amount of interest and enthusiasm. And I think that's something that you perhaps don't see. It's almost a fire and forget, that you come in, you do the webinar, phew, that's over. But actually the repercussions and the thought and the questioning and the insights that are gained are quite profound. And I know that because they all come to me, or many of them come to me. And I think that's something you won't see. I know that members and people who are going to watch this are going to be deeply appreciative of your efforts. And I think, Jochen, you've got a quick comment you'd like to come in with.
Yeah, I just noticed that there was one question that was put to BDS, was regarding deer whistles. And I noticed we hadn't addressed that. We've looked at various methods of mitigation, like, you know, deer deterrents at the roadsides. But for the deer whistles, I just want to preempt, you know, people asking that question again, perhaps when we put it out. And really, overall, while there's some anecdotal evidence that air-activated whistles fitted to cars may work, there is no scientific evidence whatsoever that they work at all. So, you know, there's a good independent article to which I'll send you the link, which really just shows that air-activated, you know, whistles just have not got any real chance of reducing deer collisions. They've been around for over 50 years, and even insurance companies in the States actually advise against them rather than for them even.
I really do thank you for raising that issue, Jochen, because I know that there will be people within the branches who will be listening very carefully to this, who will then be interacting with the public and just picking up the paper. I know people will be reading that. And as I say, the repercussions of these webinars are quite profound. I think we've also got some little routes where we're going to have some further collaboration and communication. I'd just like to say finally, thank you ever so much. I've found this really interesting and stimulating. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to bury my heads in lots of books and do a bit more research myself to bring myself up to speed. But that's what these webinars are about. It's about stimulating people to go and think, stimulating people to communicate, and making people think about better ways in which we can get messages over to help the public and to help the great British outdoors. So thank you very much indeed. I appreciate your time, and if I get any real cracking hard questions, I will track and trace you and send them on to you. So thank you very much indeed.